The person who hurt you the most probably wasn't a stranger. Sit with that for a second. It wasn't someone who never cared. It wasn't someone who was careless with you from the beginning. It wasn't even the person who lied the most or left the most dramatically. It was someone who loved you. Maybe the person who loved you most of all. And that fact, that specific, disorienting fact, is the thing nobody knows what to do with, because we have a story about how pain works in relationships. The story goes like this: people who love you protect you. People who love you are careful with you. The more someone loves you, the safer you are, and then life happens. And the story falls apart. The deepest wound most people carry wasn't inflicted by an enemy. It was inflicted by someone who would have done anything for them. Someone who showed up. Someone who stayed. And yet here's what that actually means, and why understanding it changes not just how you see your past, but every relationship you will ever have going forward. Let me tell you about a woman named Sarah. Sarah's mother was the kind of person strangers described as a force of nature. Present at every school play, every heartbreak, every 2 a.m. phone call that Sarah made from college because she didn't know who else to call. Her mother answered every single one. By every measure, she was loved. Fiercely, loudly, without condition. And yet Sarah spent most of her adult life in a therapist's office trying to untangle the particular kind of damage that love had done. Not the absence of love. The presence of it, just in a shape that didn't quite fit. Her mother's love came with an invisible charge. It arrived with an unspoken understanding that Sarah's choices were a reflection of her mother's worth. That her successes were shared. That her failures were personal. That certain feelings, doubt, disappointment, the desire to do things differently, were a form of betrayal. Sarah learned to edit. To present a version of herself that kept the love flowing without triggering the hurt. She learned to swallow the things that would make her mother's face fall. She learned, without anyone using these words, that being loved came with the condition of being manageable. And then she grew up and started choosing partners and could not, for the life of her, understand why she kept ending up in the same dynamic. Deeply loved, slowly shrinking, unable to name what was wrong because nothing was technically wrong. Being with someone who was trying so hard. Maybe this isn't your story exactly. Maybe it's not a parent. Maybe it's a partner who was devoted to you, who answered every call and remembered every small thing you'd mentioned and would have walked through fire without being asked. And still, something happened that cut deeper than anything a careless person ever did. And you've never quite been able to explain that to anyone without feeling like you sound ungrateful. You don't sound ungrateful. You sound like someone who understands that love and harm are not opposites. That they can live, quietly, in the same house. Here's the question that nobody asks out loud. If someone loves you, genuinely, deeply, without pretending, how does that love become the thing that damages you? And the more uncomfortable version of that question, does that mean love isn't enough? Most people get very nervous around that second question. Because if love isn't enough, then what are we building toward? What's the whole point? But here's what I want you to stay with before we answer it. Because this next part is where most people look away, and looking away is exactly how the pattern continues. The people who hurt us most while loving us most weren't doing it because the love was fake. They were doing it because the love was real, and the love was attached to something. Not attached to you, exactly. Attached to a version of you. The version that confirmed something they needed to believe. About themselves. About the world. About whether they were good enough, needed enough, safe enough. Think about Sarah's mother again. Her love was real. Every bit of it. But threaded through that love was a fear so old she couldn't see it anymore. A fear that she wasn't enough unless she was needed. That her worth lived in being the person her daughter turned to. That Sarah's independence wasn't just growth. It was, in some quiet chamber of her heart, a kind of abandonment, as though the love came wrapped around control. Not vicious. Control. Gentle control. The kind dressed up as concerned. The kind that says, I just worry about you, and means it completely, while also meaning please don't go somewhere I can't follow. And here's where it gets complicated. Sarah couldn't be angry about it. How do you build a case against someone who loves you that much? How do you name the harm without sounding like you're attacking the devotion? You can't. And so most people don't. Most people just carry it quietly. This specific, unnameable ache of being loved in a shape that slowly made less and less room for who they actually were. And then they take that shape into their next relationship. And their next. By the time most people figure this out, they've spent a decade wondering why love keeps feeling like pressure. Why devotion keeps feeling like surveillance. Why the people who care most seem to leave the least room to breathe. Most people figure this out too late, after the pattern has written itself into their nervous system so completely, it just feels like how relationships work. You don't have to wait that long. Here's what I got wrong about this for a long time. I thought the problem was love itself. I thought the answer was to want less of it, to need it less, to build a life so self-sufficient that nobody's love could reach far enough to do damage. That's not the answer. That's just a different kind of wound. The actual insight, the one that changes the shape of this entire conversation, is this: love doesn't hurt you. Unmet needs to be dressed up as love does. When a person loves you from a full place, from a place where their sense of worth isn't dependent on how you respond to them, that love has a particular quality. It has room in it. It can hold your growth without feeling threatened. It can celebrate your independence without experiencing it as rejection. It can sit with your difficult feelings without needing to fix them into something more comfortable. That love is the rarest thing in the world. Not because people are bad at love, but because most people come to love something underneath it that they've never looked at directly. A hunger. An old, unresolved question. Something like, am I enough? Or, will you still be here if I need you? Or, if you really saw me, would you stay? And the love they offer, however genuine it is, becomes a way of trying to answer that question. You become evidence in their ongoing case. Your devotion becomes data they collect to prove something to themselves that they haven't been able to prove from the inside. And when you can't provide the data they need, when you pull away, or change, or need something different, or simply have a bad season where you don't have much to give, the love curdles, not into hate. That would almost be easier. Into guilt trips, or emotional withdrawal, or quiet martyrdom, or the specific brand of hurt that says, after everything I've done, without ever finishing the sentence. This is the mechanism. Not malice. Unmet need with nowhere else to go. Let me bring it back to a story. There's a man named Daniel. He fell in love at 26 with someone who was, by everyone's account, extraordinary. She was the most intentional person he had ever met. She remembered the names of his colleagues, his mother's birthday, the exact day a year earlier when he'd mentioned wanting to learn to cook, and had quietly bought him a cookbook for no reason. He had never been loved like that. It felt like finally arriving somewhere. But over time he started to notice something. Every time he made a plan without her, a weekend away with friends, a spontaneous decision that hadn't included her first, her face would do a thing. Not anger. Worse. Quiet, careful hurt that she never named, but never quite hid either. And Daniel, who was kind, started reorganizing himself around that look. He stopped making spontaneous plans. He stopped having certain conversations with certain friends because explaining them later felt like too much work. He started to feel a low-grade anxiety in moments of freedom, not because freedom felt bad, but because he'd learned that his freedom had a cost, and the person paying it was someone he loved. He didn't leave for 3 more years, not because the love stopped, because he confused love with obligation so completely that he couldn't find the seam between them anymore. The wound that breakup left wasn't from cruelty. It was from the very specific exhaustion of being loved by someone who needed him to stay small to feel safe. And here's the part that cuts both ways, because Daniel, this man who felt suffocated by that love, had his own version of the same thing. His own unmet question. His own hunger that he brought silently into rooms. With different people, he was the one whose face did the thing, who felt that quiet devastation when the person he loved seemed fine without him. We are almost never just one thing in this story. Most of us have been the person who loved in a way that left marks, and the person who carries marks from someone else's love, usually at the same time, usually without knowing it. And the only way out of the pattern, the only way love stops being the thing that damages you most, is to look at what you bring underneath it. What question are you trying to answer through the people you love? What would it mean if they pulled away? If they didn't need you the way you need to be needed? Whatever comes up when you ask yourself that honestly, that's the work, not therapy necessarily, not a process or a framework. Just the willingness to see that your love, as real as it is, might have something attached to it. And that attachment isn't who you are. It's just something you picked up somewhere, a long time ago, from people who were also just trying to answer their own question. The love was real. The damage was real. Both things are true, and when you can hold both, without collapsing one into the other, you stop needing the story to be simple. You stop needing to make them a villain. You stop needing to make yourself a fool for loving them. You just see it clearly. For the first time, a person trying their best with the tools they had, and a need underneath the love that the love was never going to fix. That's not a tragedy. That's just the beginning of understanding how this actually works. So here is the question to take with you tonight. Not someday. Tonight. Think about the love that hurt you most. The person who was devoted and damaging at the same time. And instead of asking, how could they do that if they loved me? Ask a different question. What were they trying to answer through loving you? And then the harder one. The one that opens the door to something genuinely different. What am I trying to answer through the people I love right now? You don't have to have the answer immediately. You just have to be willing to ask it without flinching. Because the moment you can see the need underneath the love, yours and theirs, the whole thing stops being a wound you carry and starts being something you understand. And understanding it is the only thing that actually keeps it from repeating. The next piece of this, the part that follows naturally from here, is about what happens when you've been loved in these shapes for long enough that you start to believe they're the only shapes love comes in. What it looks like when someone shows up differently. And why, instead of feeling like relief, it sometimes feels like the most terrifying thing in the world. That's the conversation that comes next, and it is worth staying for.